Good evening, travelers. You have come far and wide this evening to the campfire to hear a tale that you may have heard before, but not like this. So please, find your places, put your swords down, and relax your bodies and your mind while we slip away into this tale. Before there were songs of adventure, there were hills. They rolled gently across the land, never rising too high, never dropping too low, as though they had settled into their shapes long ago and seen no reason to change. Grass grew thick and soft across their slopes, kept short by careful tending and generations of quiet footsteps. Trees stood where they had always stood, offering shade without asking for attention. Paths curved instead of cutting straight, following the land's own suggestions. This was a place where nothing hurried, and that was exactly how it was meant to be. The people who lived here had arranged their lives around comfort rather than ambition. They valued warm kitchens, well-kept gardens, and the reassuring predictability of routine. Days were measured not by great achievements, but by meals taken at proper hours, conversations held without urgency, and evenings that ended exactly as expected. In this land, surprise was considered impolite. Change, when it came at all, arrived slowly enough to be ignored. The homes reflected this philosophy. They were built into the hills themselves, shaped to follow the curves of earth rather than to force it into angles. Doors were round and welcoming. Windows were placed carefully to catch the afternoon light. Inside, hallways bent gently, leading from one comfortable room to another without sharp corners or sudden turns. Everything was designed to feel settled. Nothing was meant to feel temporary. The people here did not think of themselves as important. They had no desire to be remembered by history, and they were content to let the wider world pass them by. If rumors of distant mountains or restless kingdoms reached their ears, they were received with mild curiosity and then set aside. Those things belonged to elsewhere. This place belonged to now. And in one particular hill lived someone who embodied this way of life completely. The unexpected visitor. The morning began as all proper mornings should, quietly. Light filtered through the round windows of the hill, warming the walls before the day truly began. The air carried the familiar scent of earth and wood and the faint promise of breakfast. Outside, birds moved between hedges without urgency, and the path beyond the front door lay undisturbed. Inside the hill, the one who lived there moved carefully, not because he feared disturbance, but because he valued order. Every step followed a pattern, learned over years of repetition. Cups were placed where cups belonged. Chairs remained exactly where they had been left the night before. Nothing was meant to surprise him, and yet, as he stood near his front door, there came a feeling, subtle at first, then something had shifted. Not within the room, but beyond it. It was the sense of a presence where none had been expected, a weight pressing gently against the edge of routine, the kind of feeling that made one pause, not in alarm, but in curiosity. Before he could fully consider it, there came a sound, a knock. It was not loud, it did not demand attention, it was simply there, echoing softly through the curved hallway. He stood still. Knocks were rare in this part of the world, visitors even rarer. The idea of someone standing on the path outside his door felt out of place, like a word written where it did not belong. He waited, half expecting the sound to fade on its own. It did not. Another knock followed, patient and unhurried. Reluctantly, he moved toward the door. He opened it. When he opened it, he found himself looking up. The figure outside was taller than most anyone had known, wrapped in muted colors that seemed to belong to the road rather than home. His presence felt calm, but not comfortable, like a question waiting to be answered. They exchanged a few polite words. The visitor smiled in a way that suggested familiarity, though none had been established. He spoke of the road as if it were an old companion. He mentioned stories, not as entertainment, but as inevitability. And before the morning could fully settle back into itself, the visitor had left behind something far heavier than his footprint on the path. An idea. The door was closed again. The hill returned to its quiet shape. But the silence no longer felt complete. Throughout the day, the thought lingered. It surfaced during meals, during moments of rest, during the careful rearranging of familiar objects that no longer quite fit as they had before. By evening, the road beyond the hill no longer felt distant. It felt awake. And somewhere between comfort and curiosity, the world waited. The morning settled into the hill in the same manner it always had, without announcement or insistence, as though it understood that nothing inside required urgency. Light filtered through the round windows gradually, not flooding the rooms but resting within them, spreading across the curved walls and low ceilings with a familiarity earned over years of repetition. It revealed the shapes of furniture that had not moved in decades, the shelves that had held what they had always held, and the quiet spaces between objects where nothing new was expected to appear. The air itself felt composed, balanced between warmth and coolness, carrying no hint of change or disturbance. Outside, the grass along the hill bent gently beneath a mild breeze, and the path that wound away from the door lay empty and undisturbed, as it nearly always did at that hour. Bilbo Baggins moved through this space with the unthinking confidence of someone whose life had been carefully arranged to avoid surprise. His steps followed familiar patterns across the floor, each turn and pause occurring where it always had, as though the house itself anticipated his movements. He reached for the kettle without looking, set it upon the fire, and waited as it began its slow work. Waiting was not an inconvenience to him. It was confirmation. There was a comfort in knowing precisely how long things would take, in standing still while something familiar unfolded at its expected pace. The sounds of the hill, the faint creak of settling wood, the soft response of stone to warmth, formed a rhythm he recognized as deeply as his own breathing. Bilbo had always believed that a well-lived life was one built upon consistency. He took pride in the predictability of his days, in the way each morning mirrored the one before it, closely enough to be reassuring. Meals arrived when they were meant to. Evenings concluded quietly. Conversations, when they occurred at all, were brief and polite, rarely straying into uncomfortable territory. He saw no virtue in unpredictability, no appeal in events that disrupted routine or demanded explanation. Change in his estimation was rarely an improvement and often an unnecessary complication. He had built his home and his habits to protect against it, shaping his world so that very little was left to chance. This sense of completion, of having arrived at a state beyond which nothing more was required, had settled over his life so thoroughly that Bilbo rarely questioned it. The hill was not merely where he lived. It was the physical expression of his preferences. curved and contained, offering shelter not just from weather, but from the wider world itself. Within its walls, time moved gently, untroubled by distant concerns. Roads, travelers, and tales of far-off places belonged elsewhere to people who found satisfaction in restlessness. Bilbo had long since decided that such things were not meant for him, and the quiet of the morning seemed to agree, holding steady around him as if to affirm that nothing needed to be added. As the kettle warmed, Bilbo remained standing beside it, his hands folded loosely in front of him, his thoughts moving no faster than the steam beginning to gather at its spout. He did not rush these moments. He had learned long ago that there was a particular pleasure in allowing things to unfold at their natural pace, in resisting the urge to hurry even the smallest task. Haste, he believed, was the beginning of disorder. It led to spills, to forgotten steps, to days that never quite settled into themselves. By contrast, patience preserved harmony. It ensured that each part of the day arrived properly prepared, without friction or strain. This philosophy extended well beyond the kitchen. Bilbo applied it to every aspect of his life with quiet diligence. He kept his affairs modest and manageable, preferring fewer obligations to many and familiar faces to new ones. When letters arrived from distant relations or acquaintances he barely remembered, he read them carefully but without enthusiasm, often setting them aside with a sense of relief once they were finished. Invitations were weighed thoughtfully and declined just as thoughtfully. There was no rudeness in this, he told himself, only discernment. One could be polite without being available, considerate without being drawn into unnecessary entanglements. He had, over the years, become particularly skilled at avoiding anything that hinted at complication. He recognized the signs early: conversations that lingered too long, questions that carried expectations beneath them, stories that began with laughter but ended with obligations. These were the beginnings of trouble, and Bilbo prided himself on noticing them before they took hold. He believed that most people invited difficulty into their lives simply by failing to step aside when the warning appeared. He, by contrast, had mastered the art of gentle retreat. From time to time, he would hear tales of distant events, of disputes that had gone on for years, of journeys that had ended badly, of people who had left comfortable homes only to find themselves longing for them again. Such stories only reinforced his convictions. Comfort, once secured, was not something to be risked lightly. It was fragile in ways people rarely acknowledged until it was gone. Bilbo had no intention of learning that lesson firsthand. The hill itself seemed to share this outlook. Its walls curved inward protectively, its rooms arranged not to impress but to contain. Sounds from outside arrived softened, stripped of urgency before they could intrude. Even the light that entered seemed filtered, as though the hill had learned to admit only what it could accommodate. Bilbo took comfort in this quiet cooperation between himself and his home. Together, they formed a complete system, one that required no additions and resisted interference. And yet, as the kettle finally began to sing, there came the faintest sense of something that within this system was being tested. Not disrupted, at least not yet, but observed. The thought passed quickly, leaving behind no clear reason for concern, and Bilbo dismissed it as easily as it had appeared. There was, after all, nothing to suggest that the day would be any different than those that had come before it. The morning remained calm, the hill remained still, and Bilbo, convinced of the solidity of the world he had built, reached for his cup, fully expecting the quiet to continue. Bilbo sat at the small table near the window, his cup warming his hands as he gazed out at the gentle curve of the hill beyond the glass. The view rarely changed, and that was precisely why he favored it. The grass grew as it always had, The path curved away at the same angle, and the sky above, when visible, carried the same familiar hues that marked the passing of seasons without demanding attention. There was a reassurance in the sameness, in the knowledge that one glance could tell him nearly everything he needed to know about the world beyond his door. He sipped his tea slowly, allowing for the warmth to settle before swallowing, a habit formed over years of unhurried mornings. Each movement felt deliberate, part of a sequence that required no thought to maintain. And yet, as he sat there, a curious awareness crept in, faint but persistent, like the memory of a sound one could not quite place. It was not discomfort exactly, nor was it fear. It was the subtle sense that something was being held in reserve, waiting for the appropriate moment to present itself. Bilbo frowned slightly, more annoyed than concerned. He did not appreciate vague impressions. They lacked usefulness and resisted organization. He preferred problems that announced themselves plainly, with clear edges and obvious solutions. This feeling, whatever it was, seemed determined to remain indistinct, hovering just beyond the reach of explanation. He shifted his chair, then shifted back again, as though movement might dislodge it, but the sensation lingered all the same. The hill, for its part, remained quiet. No unfamiliar sounds disturbed the air. No shadows moved where they should not. The familiar creaks and murmurs of the structure settling into the day continued as expected. If anything, the stillness seemed deeper than usual, as though the space itself were listening. Bilbo found the thought mildly unsettling and dismissed it at once. Houses, after all, did not listen, and mornings did not carry intentions. He turned his attention back to the room, taking inventory of the contents as he often did when his thoughts wandered. Everything was in its place. The shelves had exactly what they always had. The door remained firmly shut. The path outside lay empty, just as it had moments before. There was no evidence, visible or otherwise, to suggest that the balance of the day had been disturbed. And yet, the sense of anticipation did not fade. It rested quietly beneath his awareness, neither growing nor receding, simply present. Bilbo finished his tea and set the cup aside, resolving to busy himself with small tasks in hope that activity would restore the comfortable clarity he preferred. There was no reason to dwell on a feeling without cause. The morning, he reminded himself, had only just begun, and there was every expectation that it would proceed as mornings always had, calm, complete, and unremarkable. Still, as he rose from the table, he could not shake the impression that the hill itself was holding its breath, waiting for something it had not yet named. Bilbo moved about the hill with an intention he could not have articulated if asked. He straightened objects that had not been disturbed, aligned items that had already sat properly, and checked small details whose order had never before required confirmation. These actions usually brought a sense of closure, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing a thing had been tended to. This morning, however, each completed task seemed to open space for another, as though the work itself were merely a way of delaying something else. He paused near the hallway that led to the front door, listening without realizing he had done so. The space beyond it remained silent, offering no indication of movement or presence. Still, he found himself lingering there for longer than necessary, his attention drawn toward the door in a way that felt faintly unreasonable. He told himself it was nothing more than habit, that the doorway simply marked the boundary between inside and out, and that boundaries, by their nature, demanded occasional acknowledgement. The feeling persisted. Bilbo turned away and resumed his slow circuit through the rooms, but the sense of being observed, of something unseen standing just beyond the edge of the morning, refused to disperse. It was not a threatening awareness. There was no urgency to it, no sharpness that might have inspired alarm. Instead, it carried a patient quality, as though whatever waited did so without expectation, confident that time would serve its purpose. He stopped again, this time beside the coat rack near the entrance, and regarded it with mild irritation. Nothing hung there that had not hung there the day before. His walking stick rested in its usual place. The door remained closed, solid and reassuring. He placed a hand against it briefly, feeling the cool firmness of the wood beneath his palm, and was surprised by the faint tension he felt in response. This, he decided, was foolishness. Hills did not anticipate events. Doors did not invite interruptions. Mornings unfolded according to their own quiet logic. And there was no reason to believe this one would behave differently. Bilbo withdrew his hand and straightened. Determined to reclaim his composure, he reminded himself of all the reasons his life had remained undisturbed for so long. He had given the world no cause to intrude upon him. He had made no promises, extended no invitations, and expressed no interest in anything beyond the boundaries of his carefully tended home. The stillness deepened. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the air within the hills seemed to settle further, as though preparing itself. Sounds faded into the background until even the familiar murmurs of the structure felt distant. Bilbo stood alone in the hallway, aware of the quiet in a way he had never been before. The moment stretched, held in place by an unseen tension that resisted release. And then, just as he began to convince himself that the feeling would pass as inexplicably as it had arrived, the morning paused, balanced on the edge of something that had not yet announced itself. When we next come back, we'll be picking up on page 5 of this story here. For there and back again, a retelling and reconceptualized way to experience The Hobbit. We thank you, travelers, weary wanderers, for taking time out tonight to enjoy yourself here by the campfire. And we look forward to seeing you again.